Hello and welcome back to the Shades of Orange. Today I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite wintry or Christmassy horror and thriller reads. This is one of my favorite recommendations to do every year. For the last 2 years I've been recommending some of my favorite horror books, and this year I decided to include some thrillers as well. If you want even more recommendations once we're done here, I'm going to have links in the description box and in the cards to my previous videos so you can go check those out, because I'm not going to do any repeats, but I have a good variety here as I usually do, and let's get into the books. Now let's start with the thrillers, and first I want to talk about The Mist by Ragnar Johansson. This is told over 2 perspectives, one being a detective who is investigating a grisly murder that took place at an isolated farmhouse in the countryside far away from the cities in Iceland. And the story is also told in a second perspective 2 months prior when the actual murders took place. And you get to follow the couple that are celebrating Christmas Eve, and they welcome a stranger into their house who is out in the cold and stuck. And as you imagine, things go terribly wrong from there. Now, this of course I want to recommend because it's not only set in Iceland in the winter, but also of course has that Christmas setting. So the setup is really nice because it takes place on Christmas Eve, and the couple start by talking about Icelandic Christmas traditions, which are wonderful by the way, because they involve a lot of book reading and buying books for each other, and it's basically a reader's dream. But the book also is set during a blizzard. They are in a very isolated part of the country and are really cut off from other resources, and so the weather really plays a large role in the story. And I do want to mention that while this is a Christmas book, technically it's very grim and depressing, so this is definitely not a cozy thriller by any means. In fact, I found it very depressing to read. The present day, as I mentioned, deals with the detective who's investigating the case, and you also get an insight into her own personal life, which involves her daughter who is also suffering from depression. And this book is dark in a very emotionally heavy way with lots of triggering content, so just be warned that this is not a light book, this is not a fun book. This is not the cozy contemporary romance Christmas stories that everyone else is talking about, but a really dark take on some very serious subject matter. But it's set around Christmas, it's set in a blizzard, so if that sounds good to you, I definitely recommend it. It's a great place to start, and also good for anyone that's trying to read more translated work. Also for thrillers, I want to recommend Dying for Christmas by Tammy Cohen. This is a book I have recommended a ways back on my channel, but it's worth bringing up again because this is a story about a woman who gets kidnapped on, I believe, Christmas Eve, and she is held over the holidays by a man, and every day he gives her a little gift and basically is fulfilling the 12 days of Christmas with a corresponding gift for each day. Now, when I first heard the synopsis of that, I picked up this book with very low expectations because I expected it to be a really cheesy thriller because of the fact that it has this Christmas setup. And so I went in just expecting a fun ride, and I will say that this book really blew away my expectations. It's actually one of my favorite thriller books. It's a 4-star read for me, and if anything, I wish almost it didn't have that Christmas setting, because I think that a lot of people don't pick it up other times of year because of course they want to wait till Christmas. So if you've thought about reading this book before, read it this Christmas. It's actually just a really good thriller. It has a really good twist I did not see coming, and I just thought it was solidly written. There are so many cheaply written Christmas books that just get put on the shelf to sell during the holiday season, but this one is just hands down well written, well plotted, and really engaging. So I really hope you give it a try. I just think it's fantastic, and I always look for an excuse to plug it in a video like this one. Now, switching over to horror, I want to recommend The Terror by Dan Simmons, which, if you don't know, follows the crew of a historical expedition that went out to navigate the Northwest Passage, and they got stuck in the Arctic, and the story is based off of true events, but it's definitely a fictional take on it with some horror elements. And so we follow the crew as they are stuck in the Arctic and have to survive, because this is again again, a supernatural horror book. It also brings in elements of some sort of entity that is possibly honing in on them. And this is a book that is just so good at capturing cold and isolation and all the good things that you want in this time of year for those of you where the weather gets cold or you at least want to reproduce that experience. I will say the author did a great job of really acknowledging how dangerous the cold can be. They talk about frostbite and the other conditions that can arise when people are in this sorts of situation. And this book is also very long, and for people who are like myself, I do tend to prefer reading long books during the winter. Maybe it's because I have nothing else better to do, but it feels really good to curl up around a fireplace or a Christmas tree with a big chunky book. And this one is definitely long. It's probably longer than the books I typically prefer myself, but I did find it very suspenseful at times. There are some really good moments, and it actually does have a few scenes that do involve Christmas. Because this expedition took so long, you get to find out how they celebrated the holidays while in a state of survival, and so using the different rations and trying to celebrate in some ways. But for the most part, I'm recommending this for the winter horror elements, and I definitely think it's a great one to pick up in December, or again even in like January, March, etc., while it's still cold, at least in your area, hopefully. Next, I want to recommend The Shuttering by Anya Alborn, and this follows a group of young people that are going off to a cabin to vacation one last time together. You find out that this group of individuals have a relatively complicated past where different people dated and were interested in each other at one point or another, and so now they are getting together. Little do they know that there are possibly some kind of creatures or entities that come out during the winter months and are possibly hungry for people. And this is a story that I describe as a creature feature that reads like a somewhat cheesy teen slasher movie, because again, you get a group of young people going out to a cabin, and then slowly, one by one, as you would expect, they start to get picked off or attacked. And this is the kind of book where you are really happy when that happens, because the characters are possibly a little annoying. They have, as I mentioned, very complicated relationships with each other, and I definitely enjoyed when they started getting attacked. I like that the creatures themselves started out as fairly ambiguous. At first, we really didn't see what was out there, and the idea of the unknown was almost scarier than once we actually got to see them. And again, this is set during the winter. The characters go and ski and snowboard, so it definitely ties in well with just winter horror in general. And it's a fun one. It's not the most revolutionary book I've ever read. It doesn't reinvent the genre, but if you're just looking for a fun creature feature book, this one is a good one to recommend, especially this time of year. And I also want to quickly mention The Visitor by Sergio Gomez, which is a horror novella about a group of people that come together in a diner during a blizzard on a wintry day around Christmas, when a little visitor comes and is possibly an alien. So this is a little piece of sci-fi horror. I'll be honest, it didn't leave the most lasting impression on me, but I know that a lot of people really enjoyed this one. And again, it is very topical for this recommendations video, so I did want to include it for those of you that are interested in trying it for yourself. I also want to briefly mention a short story collection that I absolutely love and do not talk about enough, and that is Taktumi. And this is a Canadian collection of stories that are written by the Inuit people up north. And I love, first of all, that the collection is an own voices story, so you get people who are of Inuit descent themselves telling these stories, and the stories themselves are fantastic because they are all about Arctic horror. And I loved so many of these. One of the stories involves a blizzard, and again, it's so atmospheric, it's chilling, and I loved it. My favorite story involved cannibalism, which was, as you would expect, gruesome and bloody, and I thought it was very scary, very creepy. Highly recommend the collection for that one alone. And I just think it's a really good collection, and again, it brings some diversity to this list with, again, some own voices stories. And you know me, I love Indigenous fiction, I love Canadian fiction. This one is definitely a favorite of mine. And last, I want to sort of recommend a graphic novel that fits the topic well, but you have to go into it with the right expectations. That graphic novel is called The Last Christmas, and this is set in a future where there is an apocalyptic event, zombies break out, and Christmas is basically ruined. Santa Claus has his North Pole location attacked and his wife is murdered. And because of that, he decides that there is going to be no more Christmas. He is done and he just forsakes the world. However, he eventually is called back into action and decides to save Christmas and save the world. And so what takes place is a bloody post-apocalyptic adventure story that definitely has elements of horror and thriller, and it reads like a really cheesy B movie. And again, you have to go into it with the right expectations. It's meant to be very darkly funny, and sometimes it was, and sometimes it was just eye-rolling. But if you're in the mood for something just very different, something very inappropriate and obnoxious and just over the top, you might really enjoy this one. I was able to read it for free through Hoopla, which is a digital library app that I have, and so hopefully if you can check it out without it being an expense to yourself, I would cautiously recommend it only to those of you that actually think that that sounds good. It's not going to be for everyone, but I did read it and I did want to include it on this list because sometimes it's just about giving you different ideas of different books so that each reader can find something for their own taste. So that's it for this video. I would love to hear which of the books you're planning on picking up this Christmas or wintry season, and please recommend me your favorites because I would love to do this video again next year if you're interested in me keeping it going, but I need to keep reading, so recommendations are always appreciated. On that note, please remember that if you want more recommendations, you can watch my previous year's videos, which again will be linked in the cards and description box. If you're new to my channel, you can consider subscribing. I read a lot of horror, thrillers, science fiction, and fantasy. Otherwise, you can still help me out by giving this video a thumbs up, sharing it around online, and hitting that little notification bell. Otherwise, I'll be back again soon. Thanks for watching. Okay, bye.